Hello, everyone, and good afternoon to you. Thank you for coming out on this brisk and beautiful morning for us. My name is Annie Miskevich, and I'm the Executive Director at your Schaumburg Township District Library. On behalf of our esteemed and committed Library Board of Trustees, I want to take the time to thank you all for joining in our One Book, One Community, along with our wonderful and dedicated staff, and thank you for coming out today for this incredibly special afternoon event with author Angie Kim. Our One Book, One Community is so particularly important to us at Schaumburg Library. We love the idea of trying to unite everyone in our community through the joy of reading and through fostering meaningful dialogue. I'm so pleased that this year's selection of Happiness Falls by Angie Kim allowed us to come together and discuss the very timely, important, and universal themes of human connection, happiness, communication, and family dynamics. I hope that our One Book community gave you a personal chance to connect with your family or your friends, your neighbors, or other library book lovers in a different and meaningful way. And so, I'd like to introduce our featured guest, Miss Angie Kim, with a few words. Angie moved as a preteen from South Korea to the suburbs of Baltimore. After graduating from Interlochen Arts Academy, she studied philosophy at Stanford University and then attended Harvard Law School, where she was also the editor of the Harvard Law Review. Her debut novel, titled Miracle Creek, won the Edgar Award and the ITW Thriller Award, and was named one of the 100 best mysteries and thrillers of all time by Time magazine. Angie's second novel, Happiness Falls, was named Oprah's #1 novel of 2023 and a Washington Post Best Book of the Year. Without further ado, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Angie Kim.
Thank you so much. I wanted to start by saying thank you so much to Annie and Stephanie and Molly and everyone at the Schaumburg Library, the library board and staff, the One Book committee members, and most of all, you, the readers and the community. And I'm just so thrilled that you guys all voted for this book as a One Book selection, and then read it all, and have been reaching out to me on social media and so many fun things. I actually stopped by even at a fun book club brunch on the way over here about a mile away. So it's been really, really fun, and I really hope to keep the conversation going. So I wanted to go ahead and talk to you a little bit today about the evolution of Happiness Falls. And so it starts, as it always does for me, with the characters. And so it started with the family and with Mia's voice in particular. And to tell you that story about how I found that voice and this family, which I actually started writing about back in, I think it was 2010, and with a short story that was actually one of my first published short stories in fiction in 2013, so over 10 years ago now. And to tell you that story, I have to talk about how being a writer is actually my 5th career. So I started writing in my 40s. I started as a litigator, as a lawyer. And then I moved over to management consulting because I realized very quickly that I hated everything about being a lawyer except for being in the courtroom, which I loved. That part I loved, that was great. But everything else I hated, which was, sad because being in the courtroom was only like 5% of your time. And so I then went into management consulting and kind of like transitioned to business, and then I was a .com entrepreneur. And then came the most difficult and challenging and rewarding career that I had, which is actually being a stay-at-home mom to my 3 boys. Now, my 3 boys, they're all kind of grown now for the most part, and they're all doing great now. But when they were babies and toddlers, they all had different issues, medical issues. And so one day, just kind of exasperated after having kind of fallen apart in the middle of the very public aisle at the local Whole Foods, where I was trying to find something that wouldn't kill one of my kids, and I did not succeed. And so I was starting to cry very publicly, and ran into a friend of mine who gave me a huge hug, and I just kind of unloaded. And I felt that catharsis of, just telling other people what I was going through. And I loved that so much. So later that night, I started writing. And I started with, essays about what I was feeling as a mom. And what was interesting about this was that my husband, when he started reading some of these things that I was writing and intending to send out for publication, he, who's also a lawyer, he kind of wisely said, hey, these things that you're writing, they're not, just your stories. There are family stories, there are kids' stories, and there's issues of medical privacy and all of that sort of stuff. So why don't you try fiction? And I was like, fiction? I don't know how to write fiction. I've never done that. And so but I was an avid reader, of course. And so I started with some writing classes at my local Bethesda Writer Center, and I started taking classes in short stories. And I started with stories about mothers like me, basically like fictionalizing the essays that I had already written. But very quickly, I went to Korea, which was kind of where my heart was. So I moved from Korea to the US as an 11-year-old. And there were just so many things that I had hidden away for so many reasons that I'm gonna get into later. And it just felt amazing to me. And it was almost like I was discovering myself and also discovering sort of that magical thing that I had been looking for as I was going from career to career and job to job. I had been looking for something that would make me happy and satisfied on a day-to-day level, as well as something that, I could kind of like look back to and sort of feel in a macro way satisfied about. And I had found that with fiction writing. And so one of the short stories that I started with was in Mia's voice, Mia from the narrator for Happiness Falls, except that she was 14 in this story, and she had a twin. I'm an only child, and I'd always been very, very envious of my twin cousins, with whom I ran around, in Korea, and sort of ran around Seoul and all of that sort of stuff. And so I kind of imagined them and running around this graveyard outside of Seoul, and it's for those of you who remember this part, Mia refers to it as the graveyard incident, and it was really about the twins, both Mia and her twin John, feeling guilty about their younger brother Eugene, and I think there was a lot of my own maternal guilt that kind of I had, superimposed on them. And this guilt about doing something to their mom that they didn't mean to do. It was kind of a prank gone wrong, that they felt responsible for taking away Eugene's voice, literally. They imagined it kind of seeping out of their mom's womb as she was pregnant with Eugene when they did this kind of childish prank. And they were going around this graveyard literally with this magical stethoscope that was this just decrepit antique kind of thing, and kind of like looking through and looking for very literally his voice in the ground. And this family stayed with me, and it was something about her voice. And even though she was 14, so unlike here in Happiness Falls, she was a little less know-it-all-y. And so she was a little less annoying at times, and but she was, she had still had that intellectual curiosity, and she still wanted to belong to her family, and she really wanted that connection. And so this voice stayed with me, and it was published in 2013, and it won a prize. And Charles Baxter, who was, somebody who I admired so much, had chosen it. He was the judge, and he had praised Mia's voice as being funny and quirky and weird, but in a good way. And so I think when somebody you admire says nice things about your writing like that, especially, being so early in my career, I kind of clung to it. And I don't know if it's that or something else about her voice, but it just kind of stayed with me. And this family stayed with me. And as my own kids were going through, things like college admissions and writing essays and, first loves and all of that sort of stuff, I would be wondering about Mia and John and Eugene, and sort of wondering, I wonder what's going on with those kids. I wonder what colleges Mia and John are applying to. I wonder if they're applying to the same colleges and what essays they're writing. And so they just kind of stayed with me throughout. So they've been in my head since, 2010. So a very, very long time. So then the other element that I knew had to be part of this was the father, Adam's obsession with happiness. So this is, you will not be surprised to hear, very much tracks my own obsession, personal obsession with happiness. And I think I became obsessed with happiness because of what I went through as an immigrant. So in Korea, we were very poor. My parents and I, the three of us, we slept in one room of another family's house. We kind of went through this period where we, I didn't really realize that we were completely poor because nobody else seemed to have much. But we really, even compared to the other kids in the neighborhood, we did not have running water indoors. So everything was outside, no indoor plumbing. We did not have electricity, we didn't have, we had to burn coal and things like that for heat. So it was that kind of a background. But I never really felt that, I didn't feel like I just always felt comfortable and happy. And so what happened was, when we found out that we got this visa through my aunt, who was an RN at Johns Hopkins and so had moved to Baltimore, when we got a family visa through her and found out that we were moving to the United States, everybody was like, wow, it's like you won the lottery. You should be so happy. You are so happy, And I was excited. And when we came to live with my aunt, I just remember coming to this beautiful suburban house. I had my own bedroom for the first time. I had a bed for the first time. I had, indoor plumbing. Toilets are amazingly wonderful things that are miraculous if you've never seen it. Same thing with showers and all of these things, and microwaves and refrigerators. So it should have been a magical time. But I lost my parents in some ways throughout this, transition, because my parents had to work in this tiny grocery store in order to make a living. And it was in a very bad part of downtown Baltimore, thick bulletproof glass. My dad was actually shot, and the bullet grazed his neck, so he was okay, but still. And because it was so dangerous there, they wouldn't allow me to come visit. And they basically had to live there in the store because the hours were so long. It was like 6 a.m. to midnight. And so they would just sleep in the back, in this tiny little cupboard where they stuffed, like some mattress and things like that. And so it was a really, really hard time. And I remember still like telling myself, I should be happy. I am happy, like trying to convince myself. And thinking so much about this kind of disconnect between objective and subjective, happiness. And so that's something that I sort of thought about for so long. And then when I heard about this happiness study involving people who won the lottery, a group of people who won the lottery, and then another group of people who were in accidents and became paraplegics, and how a year after those life-defining, kinds of events, their happiness levels were basically the same. And I heard about that in a psych of philosophy or philosophy of psychology kind of class. And I remember that striking me as so profound, and thinking back to my own experience and thinking like, yeah, I can totally see that because of that baseline. That baseline that I had when I was in Korea, and I didn't realize that that was so different from baselines that other people were experiencing. And so I was judging my own happiness in that way. So there's a lot about the relativity of happiness, as I came to think of it, in Miracle Creek, my first novel as well, and Hierarchy of Disabilities and things like that. And all of those things were things that I sort of thought, okay, I really want to explore this even further in a systematic way in my next novel, whatever that is. And so it's actually funny because the Happiness Falls started as Happiness Quotient, and that's actually how we sold it to my publisher and all of that sort of stuff. And it was, at the very beginning, I sort of thought it was going to be a story about a family, the Parkson family, and being kind of quirky family and very philosophically oriented. And the father maybe, having a disease or going through something difficult in the hospital, and the family wanting to help him out and help him to basically attain his goal of, taking all of his thoughts about happiness and publishing a book by suggesting these quirky happiness experiments, which are, of course, in the book. It's funny because some people have said to me, like, they don't really like Adam the father because he made his family go through these happiness experiments. And I guess I never really thought of that in that way, because in my mind, the origin of those experiments were actually from the family, from the mom and, Mia and John. And so that's sort of how it started. And when I was starting to work on this novel, I would procrastinate. I'm a huge procrastinator. I would procrastinate on writing by working on these happiness spreadsheets and thinking of like the most ridiculous, extreme circumstances. What happens if you're having the most gorgeous wedding in the world in like this gorgeous beach in Fiji, and then right before the wedding happens, your fiance gets killed by a plane that crashes into him or something. How would your happiness levels change, and what does that mean about your expectations and your baselines? So I have all these spreadsheets, so many of them. And that's a lot of my notes on that, of course, made their way into the notebook, the happiness notebook that Adam kept. And so those were the sort of two things that I had in place first. And then came the heart of the story for me, which is Eugene's voice and his journey. And this is so important to me. And again, it really does come from my experience moving from Seoul to Baltimore. And for those of you who have read the author's note at the end or listened to my reading it in the audiobook, I apologize for sort of like retelling that story, but I just really can't talk about this book without telling this part of the story, which is that when we moved, and we immigrated to the US, I mean, I talked already about how miserable I was, and a lot of that, of course, did have to do with, missing my friends and missing my family and feeling like I was disconnected from my parents in a huge way. But even more than any of that, I think it's the loss of self-competence and that sense of confidence in myself that I had from basically losing the ability to speak, even though it was temporary, even though it was limited only in one language. So I didn't speak any English. I think my parents tried to teach me, the basics like hello and hi and like, how to say lavatory, because I could not say bathroom, because in Korean it comes out as bathroom, and they were like, no, nobody's gonna understand that. And that, when you're going to a school for the first time, like knowing how to ask for the bathroom is a very important thing. And so like practical things like that. And I knew that it was going to be hard. I knew that it was going to be challenging, right? But logistically challenging, I sort of thought. I didn't really realize until I was in that situation, unable to speak, looking at all these people who looked so different from me and who spoke so differently from the way that I sounded. I didn't realize how much we equate oral fluency with intelligence. And that deep assumption was within me as well. So when I couldn't speak, even though I knew why I couldn't speak, even though I knew better intellectually, I still felt like a pabo. I felt like a stupid person. And it got worse as I learned enough English so that I could sort of figure out receptively what people were saying, but I still couldn't speak it very well, or really at all. And what I realized then is that when you can't speak, people assume that you can't understand. So people were talking about me in front of me, making fun of me, even as they were like kind of smiling, and nodding as if they were being nice to me when of course they weren't. And so it's like one of the most humiliating things that I think I've ever been through. And I really tried to not even think about it for a really long time. And it wasn't until I started writing about that time that I realized how deeply rooted that shame and that embarrassment was within myself, and how that's made me, like, I'm one of the most insecure people I've ever known. And my kids make fun of my husband, and my kids make fun of me all the time because they're like, I don't understand why you're so insecure. I'm like, yeah, I don't really understand that either. But then, once I started writing about this, I think I kind of got it. And so it's one of these things that even, 40 years, it's been over 40 years since then. And I'm standing in front of you now and telling the story, and I still feel kind of that flush of shame. And so it's something that was a huge thing for me. And so fast forward to when I became a mom. And for one of my kids who had hearing loss, and he had apraxia, some oral motor issues that came from his ulcerative colitis, for which I did hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is the subject of, the setting for my first novel, Miracle Creek. I became really close friends with the moms of a bunch of people whose kids were non-speakers, and everybody presumed that they were cognitively very disabled, so that they couldn't ever, learn to read or anything like that. And so people, of course, talked about them in front of them all the time. But I didn't really draw a parallel between my situation and that. And my friends at some point, maybe like 9 years ago, they started working with these therapists who started asking, what if their inability to speak, most of them had cerebral palsy or they had autism, what if these are motor issues and not cognitive issues? And then started, teaching them very painstakingly, kind of the same way that, Eugene learns to spell. First on these huge stencils with only a couple of letters, and then, full stencils, and then independently through, iPad boards and typing and things like that. And they started sending around these beautiful essays that these kids had written. It wasn't just like, oh, I want an apple or anything like that. It was like, gorgeous high school level essays about the pain of being inside and being imprisoned in their minds and having no one acknowledge that and wondering if they were going to be, kind of imprisoned for the rest of their lives in this way. And they were so sophisticated that I'm kind of ashamed to admit that I kind of questioned, like, is this really real? Like, is it possible that, that some of these, either the moms or the therapists are kind of like guiding their hands or things like that? Because I'd read some stuff criticizing some of these methods for doing that. And so I actually went to see them in person, communicated and had conversations with some of these non-speakers who were my friends' kids, and saw for myself that no, they were moving their own hands very deliberately, very slowly, and some of them were actually, after a while, after like a year or two, actually moving on to independent typing with nobody holding anything or, touching them in any way at all. And so I just thought, you know what? I have to write about this. I have to write about it. And I remember my husband saying, why are you so obsessed with this? Like, I could not talk about anything else for a while. And he was like, why are you so obsessed? Like, we don't have, like one of our kids did have some apraxia, so he needed a lot of speech therapy when he was young, but he was over that and wasn't, it didn't take that long. And he was like, why are you so into this issue? And it wasn't until I started writing about it that it dawned on me, like, if what I went through, not to say that it's in any way applicable, because what I went through was nothing compared to what these kids were going through. But if what I went through, which was so temporary and so limited, was that painful, then how much pain must these kids that I was getting to know, how much pain must this cause them? And I just could not let that go. I just couldn't. I just felt like I had to write about this somehow. So the more and more I wrote about it, the more and more that element of the story became kind of central. And so it definitely changed because, the cute little story of the dad and the quirky dad and his happiness theories and the family doing these experiments, like, that just didn't seem to cut it anymore. So I really wanted to find a story that really gave that element of the story the center stage. And so finally, that inciting incident, the premise, came to me. What is the thing that could happen that could force this family to confront, the fact that they've had these biases and they've been assuming all along that Eugene couldn't really think and he didn't understand, and forces them to actually try to communicate with him. And so, that's when it came to me that, what if something, horrible happens, like, the dad going missing, and the only person who knows what happened or who could know what happened is Eugene. And then, there would be, of course, the family needing to try to communicate with him to try to figure out what happened to the father. But even more than that, there's also like the element of course, the police are going to need to communicate with Eugene. And there's so many of these cases that were happening to my friends' families as well, where the police were misunderstanding and and the families were really, really upset because things were happening with schools and, police and neighbors and well-meaning people and things like that who were, not understanding that just because, like, somebody has some sensory meltdowns and things like that, that they're dangerous. And also that they can't, since they can't communicate, they can't sort of like appease, when something kind of gets out of control. So all of those elements kind of came together for me in this plot line. And for me, it was really interesting because it was also a coming of age for the family as well. Because it's not just about trying to find the missing person, so like a fun missing person investigation, like a mystery thriller. There is, of course, that element too, because they, of course, find out things about the father that they didn't realize, which, always happens, right? When we're trying to go into people's, inner lives to try to find clues and things like that. So there's that element, but even more than that, there's the element of this is just something that they need to come together and learn to communicate with each other, especially with Eugene, and to fully engage with, all of their assumptions and presumptions kind of set aside. And so that's sort of when it kind of came together for me. So when I started writing this story, I didn't know what had actually happened to the father. And in fact, I actually sold the story in December of 2020. And I sold it on the first 60 pages and a Venn diagram. And the Venn diagram was 3 circles, right? And I'm sure you're all thinking like, that's where Mia gets all of her charts. So the Venn diagram is 3 circles. And the first circle was the missing father investigation mystery. The second circle was the happiness quotient theories. And then the third circle was Eugene's voice fluency. And then where the 3 circles came together in the middle was, I shaded it in PowerPoint and said the ending, because I was hoping that these 3 threads would kind of come together and synthesize into the ending. So my editor, to whom I was trying to sell this, said, so what is the ending? And I was like, I have no idea. I have no idea what happened to the father. There were so many possibilities. Here are some of the possibilities, let me tell you. And so there were all these hypotheses, but I didn't know exactly what actually happened to the father. And that's just part of my writing process. As much as I try to, outline beforehand, which would be which would make the writing process so much more efficient. Unfortunately, I can't do that. It's not until I'm actually writing up that particular scene that I can see it in my mind and sort of like work it out and write around it. And but what I did tell him was I needed him to know that he was going to be comfortable with this, which was that there is going to be some ambiguity around the ending. And, and my argument was this. I said, look, and for those of you who haven't read it, my first book, Creek, it's a courtroom drama. There is an ending. There is an answer. You find out like exactly what happened, all that kind of stuff. You find out it's like a who done it, why done it, how done it, and you find out all of those answers. For this one, what I said was, listen, one of the things that makes missing person stories so unique among all other types of stories, especially crimes, or any kind of mysteries, is that nobody knows what happened except for the person who went missing, right? For the true missing person case. And that's what makes these missing person cases in real life so difficult and so emotionally just wrecking for the family members and the loved ones who go through this experience. And especially when the case isn't resolved, which so many missing person cases are not. And that is the thing. It's even more than the grief of losing someone. It's that being driven crazy by the fact that you have no idea what happened to this person. And so they could have just gone off on, a beautiful, wonderful trip just to get away from the family, maybe start a new life. That possibility's open. And the possibility's open that something horrible and awful could have happened to them. So I sort of said, in order for the full magnitude of the missing person sort of situation to be taken advantage of in the literary setting, to me, you have to have that element. And you have to see the characters going through that. Even though I feel awful for putting these characters that I love through that, and the readers too. I'm so sorry for those of you who are very upset with me that I didn't say exactly what happened. But it was also important to me that we get some kind of a resolution. So we do get a story, and we do know, I think, for the most part, what happens to the father. We know the broad outlines. And as far as the little tiny details of exactly what you think, I think what people take away from the story says a lot about how you read stories, what you're like individually as a reader and as a person, and what you think about people like Eugene, and and how much you sympathize or not with people like Mia. And so I sort of wanted to a little bit have my cake and eat it too, in that I wanted to take advantage of that ambiguity and sort of the stress and the pain that comes with that, but at the same time, have a resolution and sort of a definitive story that we can kind of hang our hats around. So anyway, so I told my editor that was my kind of thought, even though I had no idea what the actual, story, what that story would be. And so that's basically sort of how the story kind of evolved and came together. And so the book came out, when was it? Something like 7 months ago or something like that. And one thing that I wanted to sort of end with, and then we can move to some questions and all of that, is just what it's been like since the story has come out. So it has been so amazing to me. And one of the things that was amazing about the process of writing the story was having to actually research, and through research, meeting so many of these families that are impacted, whether it be the Angelman community or whether it be the non-speaking community, most of which is focused around autism. And so it's been really great to do that, especially since it gave me the opportunity to start working with some of these non-speakers. So I have been teaching creative writing to some of some non-speakers, some of whom were actually featured in a segment in Good Morning America because Happiness Falls was a GMA book club pick in September. So at the end of September, the GMA crew came down and spent an afternoon with some of my students and me, my in-person creative writing students. And they started, and I asked them, I gave them a writing prompt of like, please tell us how you're feeling with all of these TV cameras and, you know, crew, and Juju Chang, the TV anchor, who was like sort of looking over their shoulders and seeing what they were actually spelling out, and she was actually writing out what they were spelling. And so that's been amazing to get to do that work. And in fact, the last thing that I did before I put my phone on airplane mode before I came out here was actually I just got an email from one of my students who they were working on this collaborative short story, and I had sent them some feedback, and he was answering some of my questions about how they want to go through the revision process. So it's been so rewarding to do that work and enable them to tell their own stories. And then also not only that, but being able to highlight some of the non-speakers as well, not only in that way, but for example, for those of you who have read the audio or who listened to the audiobook, Eugene's words are actually read by a non-speaker. He calls himself a non-speaker, but he can speak and he can read, but he calls himself an unreliable speaker because when he opens his mouth, the thoughts that he wants to communicate don't come out. And it's almost like Tourette's, like some just random stuff comes out. And so he is able to read what's held in front of him, and he calls himself Autastic Tom. And he's 25, and he is and he has wanted to be a performer his entire life. And so Penguin Random House Audio hired him to do this part. So he was really, really excited. So I'm really proud of that as well. And I've also been in conversation, for a lot of these book tour types of things in libraries and bookstores. They're conversations between me and somebody else, or moderator and a couple of people. And so for my launch in DC and my launch in Northern Virginia, where I'm from, and also for the San Diego one, I had some of my students who are beta readers, who actually were involved in giving me feedback on earlier drafts. So they actually were in conversation with me, and they did their part of the conversation and asking me questions, either through pre-recorded voices or just spelling things out on an iPad. Or one of them actually used transparent, clear letterboard so that the audience members could see what they were pointing to. So those are some of the amazing things that I've been able to go through because of this book. So I'm really, really excited, and so excited to tell you all about it, and really want to spread the word. This is certainly, it's a fictionalized book. It is fiction. I don't want anybody using some of the techniques or whatever and trying it the way that I describe it or anything like that, because it's not a how-to, but I definitely wanted that advocacy part of the book to kind of spread through. So whatever you can all do to spread the word and tell people about stories like Eugene's, I would just love. So with that, I would love to turn to some questions.
My name is Stephanie Driscoll, and I am from the Schaumburg Library. Big thank you again to Angie Kim. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. So I have a couple of questions. We were able to get a good amount of questions online and also some questions tonight. So we will start with, we got a lot of questions on this topic, and you touched on this a little bit, that how you were able to write about people and families with disabilities with so much insight on a personal level.
Oh.
And so people were really touched by this and felt like that you really understood sort of what you were talking about, and that definitely came through in the writing.
Oh, thank you. That means so much to me. I have been so floored by so many of the messages that I've been getting from people who are part of this community, either from non-speakers directly themselves or from their families, and also from the Angelman community. So it's been really, really important to me. So one of the things that I think helps with this is that I do have a little bit of a basis for, how it feels, that frustration of not being able to speak and how that makes other people look at you. And again, it's nothing comparable to what these non-speakers are going through on a daily basis, but I do think that gave me that emotional kernel to go from. And then I have just been working, one of the good things about this, projects like this, I guess, is that I'm such a slow writer, because it gave me years and years of time to sort of get to know these families and see, not through just like a quick little interview, but through like a year or two of, back and forth and asking more questions and all of that sort of stuff, some of the stuff that they've been going through. And I think a lot of it is also that when I was doing some of the medical treatments that my own kids were going through, even though they weren't the same issues or whatever, that again, that same parental guilt, that same concern of like, how the siblings are reacting. Am I underchanging like one of my kids? And just feeling guilty about all of that. And some of the shameful thoughts that you have as a mom or as a sibling or whatever that you talk to your kids about, that those things were actually things that I could talk to some of these families about and sort of get insight into in that way. But that's really, really important to me, that it does reflect some of these realities. So that, I love that question. Thank you so much for that.
So that's a nice segue into our next question. Why did you choose an Angelman's child to write about? I have an Angelman's grandchild, and you were spot on with the behavior. I was so excited to read your book. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope you're in the audience. I love that question, and I didn't talk about Angelman during the book because I kind of figured that I would get an opportunity. What's interesting about this short story that I wrote, that I started, the whole talk, the beginning of the evolution, right, of the story, is that I didn't know about Angelman syndrome when I was writing that short story. So I kind of assumed, just like the family does in, the Parkson family in the story, that when Eugene was younger, that he had autism, and that was it. But I always saw him in my mind as having this huge smile and being so friendly and so, like wanting to connect with the others. In fact, in the short story that was published back in 2013, Mia actually calls him the happiest baby in the world. And so, and then there were other things too, like he was strangely, unusually attracted to water for some reason that the family couldn't figure out. Motor issues, he couldn't speak, all of these things. And then when I was doing some research on the spelling methods, the spelling therapies, I saw in one of the prominent people, Soma, who was the subject of a 60 Minutes documentary, like segment about her spelling method called RPM. I saw that there was a board member for her organization who said that she had a child with Angelman syndrome, and that's how she got to know spelling and all of that sort of stuff, and become an advocate for that for children with Angelman syndrome. And I was like, what is Angelman syndrome? I've never heard of this. So I looked it up, and then I immediately got chills, because everything that it was, I think the first thing that came up with was the Mayo Clinic's description. And it was, this beatific smile that's persistent, and wanting to connect emotionally with other people, and unusually drawn to water, and motor issues, and most of them being unable to speak, and also a lot of digestive issues as well, which Eugene had in the short story. And so I was like, he has Angelman syndrome. And so I just kind of got to know the Angelman community. It's a very close-knit community, I found, nationally, just because there aren't that many families. It's very rare. And so just by virtue of visiting the families, doing Zooms with them, meeting the children, having them read my drafts, my early drafts, and give me feedback, it was all those things that it really helped me to gel. And I've also there was part of me that was like, oh, I wonder if I should not talk about Angelman syndrome, just because, I don't want to be exploitative of a community. But actually, most of the families that I've talked to have been so happy about that, because it is one of these things that is so rare that sometimes pediatricians don't even know about it. So they were like, I want this to become more visible. And so they were really excited. Yeah.
And I know you said in your talk that this book is definitely fiction, so not to take anything as a guidebook. But we have a question here. Is the method that Angela uses an actual viable method for communication?
Yes, absolutely. And the only reason why I said in my author's note at the end that is, that PPT, the method that, Angela uses, that Eugene, kind of it shows us throughout the book what the progression is. The only reason I said don't take, that's not a real thing, is that it's not called, there is no such method that's used in real world that's called PPT for poke, point, and type. And so there are some other ones. They have different names, and there's RPM, like I just talked about. There's also S2C, spell to communicate. And there's other spelling methods and things like that. And so they're all they're all very similar to me. They seem very similar, and there may be certain things, some prefer all black stencil boards, and some other colors and things like that. But as far as the basic concept and presuming competence, and making sure that it's gross motor that you're using, because fine motor is so much more difficult, things like those basic things are exactly the same. Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your writing process? What advice would you give to people who aspire to write fiction?
Oh, I love that. So my writing process, I make fun of myself, because I am such a slow writer. I am so prodding, and I really do wish that I could think up these amazing plots and kind of have these outlines. So the way that I describe my writing process is, it's kind of like if I just decided one day, all right, I'm in Northern Virginia, I'm gonna drive to the West Coast. I have no idea where I'm gonna end up. It could be San Diego, or it could be Alaska. Actually, I don't even know if you can drive to Alaska, but whatever. So I say, okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just drive, but I'm gonna turn off my phone. I have a general idea of where West is because of the sun and all that, and I have a general idea of states, kind of, but not really much more than that. And then I start driving. And then one day I might be like, it's kind of a rainy day. I don't really want to go to this, beautiful park that's supposed to be right here off the road. I think I'm going to go to this cool shop that's here and spend a couple of days there, or not days, but hours there. And then drive some more. And then maybe the next day I'm like, that's a beautiful waterfall. I think I will spend, a couple of hours there hiking or whatever. And then once every week or two, I might turn on my phone and sort of go where am I? Okay, I'm actually completely north, and I've been going north, and I have not been going west at all. I really should boogie over to the west, that kind of thing. And then, but I will only do that every once in a while. So at the end of every chapter or so, or every scene, I will be where am I? Has anything been happening? Has anything, worthy happened? And kind of outline as I go along. And then the revision process becomes, once I actually, arrive on the West Coast, being okay, where have I been? Yeah, I shouldn't have gone to the shop for 2 days. That was a complete waste of time. I'm gonna get rid of that. I should spend a lot more time at this park. It was beautiful, and I only was there for a day, and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of the process that I use, and that's really it. And the other thing is I'm very inertial, so I will do this thing where for 2 weeks I will do nothing, and then I will be okay, I really need to write the first sentence, and then once I write the first sentence of the new scene, then I might get really excited, and then I might pull an all-nighter and then just finish that up or whatever. So it's not so my writing process is not one that I would recommend to anyone. But hopefully it gives you a little bit of hope that no matter what your process, you can eventually get there, that you can have a process that's so ridiculous as mine and still manage to write a book. So hopefully there's value in that.
So I do have to ask you a question about the ending. You knew you were going to get something
of course.
About this.
Yeah.
So Ellen writes, how did you decide to have Mia make that last attempt at the phone passcode incorrect? Mia decides that she doesn't want to know, but I do.
Yes. I know. This is, of course, one of the most frequent questions that I get asked. I totally know what you mean, and unfortunately, I have no idea what's on the phone, so I couldn't even tell you, even if I wanted to, because I don't know, because I haven't written that scene yet. So, if I were ever to write a sequel or whatever, the people who optioned Happiness Falls for TV, for limited TV series have talked about, well, maybe it's not a limited series, maybe it's an actual series, and season 2 can have a little more into the mystery and stuff. So maybe we'll get there. But one thing that I will say about Mia and this is that please know that it pains her so much not to have opened the phone. It was a huge thing for her, I think, not to have opened the phone, because the Mia at the beginning of the story cared more about knowing than anything else. And just like she tells us, she hates ambiguous endings, she hates open-ended things. And so for her to not to basically delete the phone and force herself to delete the phone so that she would never be tempted to open it is a huge thing for her, and shows how much she's grown. And I think the one thing that you can take away from the book is, from the first line, we didn't call the police right away. She is feeling so much regret and so much guilt. And so I think that seeps through everything that she does. And one thing she wants to do more than anything else is protect her family. And even though she's so curious about what's on that phone, as we all are, as I am too, she just couldn't, she knew that if she did that, there was a really good chance that that would jeopardize the future, right? So she actually had a choice to make between learning something definitively about the past, about what's on that phone, and being sure about the future, what's going to happen to her family, to Eugene vis-a-vis the police, and possibly her mom or John, if it turns out, based on what's on the phone, that they made up that note that's in Eugene's, pocket. So then, even though she could be more sure of what happened in the past, then she would actually be not sure of what's going to happen in the future, which is an even greater agony, I think, for somebody who's a control freak and wants, to know. So hopefully you can forgive her. But I do think that it shows a lot of growth that she did that. And for me, I modeled it a little bit after the movie Inception. When Leonardo, for those of you who know the movie, when Leo DiCaprio at the end, when he wants to know whether what he's going through is reality or a dream, and he spins that top, and then he walks away because he realizes, you know what, he doesn't need to know. He doesn't want to know. And so that's a similar thing that she has to make. She chose to, sort of walk away from, and forced herself to walk away from.
I'm going to end with this. We had someone write this in, and for me, I want to share this because I think this is kind of our goal for One Book, One Community, is to get people to discuss, to think about other things, to feel seen. So we had Linda wrote in that she's unable to make today's event, but she wanted to let you know that as the parent of a 37-year-old individual with Angelman syndrome, she very much enjoyed the book, and her copy is now making the rounds of the staff in his group home.
Aww.
So we want to thank you so much. Can everyone please
Oh,
give a big round of applause for Angie?
Thank you. And I have to say thank you for reading. Seriously, I started by saying thank you to everybody for reading this whole thing, but really, thank you for reading. Thank you for voting to make this your one book for your community. Thank you for talking about it afterwards, which I hope you will continue to do. And I talked about how on the way over here I stopped at a book club. If you have a book club or anything like that, or even if you don't have a book club and you just have a question that I didn't address today that you want to know about, just come to my website. It's angiekimbooks.com. My email is on there, and just reach out to me, or you can do it through social media, but I'm trying to be better about not being on social media, so maybe not that. But I would love to hear from you, and just say that you're a part of Schaumburg's, One Book, One Community, and I will absolutely zoom in to your book club or answer questions or anything like that, seriously. And and you can yell at me for the ending too. And I will happily take the abuse. Thank you so much for reading. Yay.